In this clip, we're looking at how to build Formulae in Microsoft Excel. So we have an example here of the Leinster Nutrition Association and its membership fees. So we have as a breakdown of, in columns A, B, and C, from row 5 downwards, is we have details of each county and its number of members. So Carlow has 39 members, and down at the bottom, Wicklow has 20 members. And for the membership fee, we want to look at 3 options. So in cells D5, E5, and F5, there are 3 options for the possible fees we might charge. So the first fee there in D5 is 40 euros, in E5 it's 45 euros, and in F5 it's 50 euros. So what we want to do is examine all 3 options and see what revenue they might generate if the different fee options were charged. So that means is in cell D6, we want to do a calculation involving C6 and D5. And then we want that same calculation, once we've done, to be hopefully replicatable down for the remaining counties. And then we want to look at option number 2. And in option number 2, again, we need to multiply C6 rather. We want to multiply it by E5. And for option number 3, we want to multiply C6 by F5. So in other words, C6 is involved in all of those calculations for Carlow, whereas the membership fee amount will vary between the values that are in cell D5, E5, and F5. So the question is can we build one formula in cell D6 that we can then replicate down for the remaining counties in Leinster and across for the other 3 fee or the other 2 fee options. So in other words, can we have a formula in one cell that we create that we can replicate for the counties and for the options. So when you take that a bit further, what that means is in cell D6, can we create one formula and replicate it? So the choices we have include the following. We can multiply C6 by D5. That's one possibility. We can multiply C6 by $D $5. And with $D $5, it means we're locking both the row, the column component, the D component, and the row component, the 5. Or is it one of the last 2 options where we're mixing the cell references? So again, we have C6 for Carlow. And this time we want the third option here gives us $D $5. And what that will mean is that the D can, if it needs to, can become an E or an F or a G, but the 5 remains fixed. 5 remains locked. Or finally, will we go for C6 multiplied by $D5? So $D5 means that it'll always remain as a D. It can't become an E or an F or a G. And the row can become a 5, a 6, or a 7, or an 8, or whatever it needs to be. So they will experiment with those and see the implications of them. So the first one we're going to try is we're going to multiply the C6 by D5 and leave out the dollar signs. So that's C6 multiply by D5 and no dollar signs. And then when we replicate that, we notice very quickly that the figures go crazy. And if we look at, say, the cell below for Dublin, if we look at cell D7, we notice that says C7 by D6. So obviously the D6 there is no good to us. And likewise, when we look to our right, we see that it's D6 multiplied by E5. And that looks okay. So it does. And the last one over on the other side, it's D6 by F5. But the problem here is that the county bit has moved. So the E5 bit in the second formula and the D5 bit in the third formula, or the F5 bit in the third formula, look fine, but the Carlow bit is wrong. So what we want to have is in each, for Carlow, we always want the formula to say C6. So if you look at the second, for the 45 euro option, it says D6, that's wrong. And if we look at the 50 euro option, it says E6, which is also wrong. So those formula are of no use to us. So part of it is okay and part of it is not okay. So far, we're not going too well. So we're going to make a fresh start again. So we'll clear out all the cells except a few. Except the first one, and see can we make any progress on it. So we have C6 by D5. And we know that when we fill down, that we want the D5 to become a D6, etc. Or not to become a D6, etc. So we don't. So if we lock the D5 part of our formula entirely, what do we get? So in that case, when we fill down, everything looks fine. We now have, for Carlo, we have C6 by D5. For Dublin, we have C7 by D5. For Wicklow, we have C17 by D5. So that part of the formula looks fine. Or up to now, the formula looks fine. But then when we try to replicate that for the remaining phi options, what happens? And what you'll notice happens is that we still have a problem with the Carlo end of things. So instead of saying C6, it says D6. And for the €50 option, it's the same problem. It says E6. So while the D5 part of my formula looks okay, when I fill down, the C part of the formula, the number of members part of the formula, that's causing us problems when we fill to our right. So therefore, we haven't got to the perfect solution yet where we can build one formula. So what we'd have to do here is, for this solution to work as I'm currently designing it, what we'd have to do is I'd have to scrap the 45 and €50 options and then go in and build them separately. So I'd be building the C6 multiplied by 45, the E5 part of the formula, put a $sign on it, and fill that down. And then separately do a similar thing for the €50 option. It'll be C6 for Carlo multiplied by F5 for the €50 possibility, and put $signs around that and fill it down. So I end up building 3 formulae using that approach. And my desire is to build just one formula. Okay, so we've built 3 separate formula. So we built one for the €40 option, we've replicated it. We built one for the €45 option, then replicated it for the rest of that column, and finally built one for the €50 possibility and replicated it for that column. So we still aren't where we need to be. So among my solutions here, is there any of them that might work? And it should be becoming fairly obvious at this stage that none of the 3 options are ideal that I've presented, nor the 4 options, sorry, in the text box here. None of those are ideal for the job in hand. So what we need to do, if you think back on it, is we need to start at the beginning again. And what we need to do is we need to look at the C part of the formula. And in the C part of the formula, C6 part of the formula, I want it to stay fixed on column C. I want to lock column C, but I don't want to lock the row part of it. In other words, I want the 6 to become a 7, an 8, a 9, down as far as 17 for when we get to Wicklow. So I'll try this version of things where I'm locking the C, leaving the 6 float so it can become a 7, an 8, a 9, etc. And then for my D part of my formula, I leave that the fee option, the €40, €45, €50 option, I leave that currently as it is. So if I fill this down, I'm going to just unshade it white again so it's back to where it was. So if I fill this down for the remaining cells, for the first column it looks fine. It's 1560, so it's C6 by D5 for Carlo, and down the bottom it is C17 by D5 for Wicklow. But now if I try to fill this to my right, I have a problem, because what Excel does is it still is now locked on D5. Okay, it doesn't move to E5 for the €45. So it's still picking up the €40 option in for the second and third, option 2 and option 3. It's still picking up €40 rather than 45 and €50. So there's now a flaw. Well, my C part of my formula, the number of members part of my formula, the first half of it is fixed, is fine. The fee option scenario is still not desirable. Still isn't where we want to get to. Okay, So my D5 there, if you look at the formula, it says C6 by D5 in the first case, and same in the second for option 2, and the same for option 3. So my D5 needs to become an E5 and an F5 as we move across the spreadsheet. So what I'm going to do is clear the cells again, and this time I'm going to change the formula slightly. So the C6 part of the formula, $C6, I'm happy with, but my $D$5 part of my formula is too rigid. Okay, it's locking both the column, the D, and the row. So what I want to do here is I want to keep the row locked on row 5, but I want the D to become an E and F as the case arises. So what I've now done is, in this version of the formula, what I have is I have $C6 multiplied by D5. So I'm going to delete all of these options here we had initially and paste in my alternative. So the formula now reads $C6. So I'll just cut $blue just to make it more clear. Multiplied by $D$5. So what this is allowing us to do is going to keep the first part of the formula locked on column C, but the row can adjust from a 6 to a 7 or an 8 all the way down as it needs to. And the second part of the formula, I'm going to allow the D to float or to be relative. And I'm going to lock it on row 5. That's why the dollar sign is in front of the 5. So now hopefully, when I fill down, the formula will adjust so that the C6 becomes a C7, and all the way down for a Wicklow it becomes a C17, and it says D5, which looks fine. And then when I highlight the cells again and replicate to my right, likewise the calculations seem to be a lot better than they were. And if we look at, for Carlo, what you see is that it says $C6 for the number of members, but then it says $5 for the fee option for €45, and that looks fine. So I'll just copy that so that you can understand the second version of in the second column, the option 2 column. This reads better, and then in option 3 for the third column, the formula reads as $C6 multiplied by F$5. So what's happened here is, because of the way I've mixed the formula, I use my dollar signs. In the first part of the formula, I remain locked on column C, and the 6 adjusts to 7 and 8, etc. all the way down. But for the second half of the formula, I do the opposite. I let the row, the column adjust, I let the column be flexible, so the D can become an E and F, etc. as it needs to, but the row remains fixed on the 5. So in terms of building this spreadsheet, what I've been able to do is I've been able to enter one formula in cell C6, in cell D6. Okay, one formula is going to cell D6, and I've been able to replicate that formula downwards for the remaining counties, and right for the other 2 columns for the 2 fee options. So in terms of my spreadsheet design, the advantage of that is I only have one formula. And one formula means that rather than having, if I had 3 formula, I would have 3 chances to make a mistake. When I have one formula, I reduce the mistakes considerably. The possibility of making mistakes is reduced hugely. And it also means that my spreadsheet was built more quickly. So it's faster, it's more efficient, and it's also less error prone. So now to test my spreadsheet a bit further, what I can do is I can change my amounts of money from 40 to, I'll make it 60, 70, and 80. So as you can see here, when I change the fee amounts, the values, the revenue options recalculate automatically for me. So the key part of this lesson is to understand that in Excel, when you're working with a block of data like this, so we have data here in a column and we have data here in a row for the fees. And when you're building formula involving that kind of a rectangular structure, it's often possible to just create one formula that you can replicate to complete the rest of the block. So as I said, we want to avoid the other approaches. So you could go with the very, very inefficient approach where you have to enter a separate formula in each cell if you didn't understand the dollar sign. Okay, the initial approach I showed here was a version of that, and I also showed how that you could create 3 formula and then replicate each one of those separately. But it's far better if you can just build one formula and replicate it to cover all the counties and all the fee options. So hopefully by virtue of this clip, you'll have a good understanding as to how you might use dollar signs when you're building formula in Microsoft Excel. So that's the end of the clip.